The 12 steps form a continuum which takes the alcoholic from a place of rebellion and defiance and denial to a place of surrender and obedience. In order to go from the place of rebellion and defiance to surrender requires a lot of hard work. It's not complicated, but it's difficult because we have through the medium of the steps and the grace of God, we have to change our entire lives, our entire way of looking at things, our entire way of approaching life, not only as it is lived by us internally, but also life as we view it and experience it on the outside. Now, in the second step, we took a major leap forward for many people because for them it meant that it became necessary to at least be willing to admit the possible existence of a higher power, of a commanding, all-powerful spirit of the universe. It even became necessary in the second step to recognize that this power is personal enough to each of us that God can restore us to sanity. Which means that for most of us, the idea that there is a God and that He is powerful enough to restore us to sanity, for many of us this was a major leap forward. But of course that does not solve the problem. It's only the beginning of the solution. Because from now on, if we are going to be seeking to surrender and to become obedient to God's will, it's pretty obvious that we're going to have to go a lot further and do it rather quickly, as a matter of fact. Let's consider for a second what the third step is. It is a decision. It is a decision, but it is not the culmination of anything, except it is the culmination of a change in our willingness, a change in our perceptions, and a coming to understand that this is the time when we must stop playing God. The third step really is more of a recognition that the wreckage of our past is a direct result of our actions and our insanities than it is any kind of a clearing away of the things which have been causing our pain and suffering, which have been causing our selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. In the third step, we're going to come to recognize that we must stop playing God, that has not worked. We'll also come to recognize what that means. Now, there's a legitimate question which you may be asked by your sponsees, some of whom are going to be very sharp, very perceptive, and if they're thinking about this, they're going to say, now how do I get from a place where all I have done is established a belief system, the belief that there is in fact a God out there, and He does in fact have the power to restore me to sanity. I have not come to the understanding or belief that He will. I have come to the understanding that He has the power to do this. Now there must be much more that has to happen here before I'm going to arrive at this decision to take my entire life and my entire will that I've been so desperately husbanding to myself, turn loose of this and let God have it. That's a monster step. Now, how am I going to arrive at that? How do I get from that second step to the third step? Now, Paul just read something of enormous importance. And oftentimes I think we let these three pertinent ideas just go flying by without thinking what they're really saying. First of all, that I am an alcoholic and I can't manage my own life. Secondly, no human power is going to relieve me of my alcoholism. This includes psychiatrists, psychologists, counselors, well-meaning friends, bosses, spouses, the whole gamut, doctors, lawyers, Indians, and chiefs. No human power is sufficient to relieve me of my alcoholism. It's so critical to understand the entire depth and weight of that particular idea, because it means that we must put aside any idea that we are going to find recovery from human solutions. There are so many examples of this, but let's cite just one of them so that we keep this in mind, and you will probably want to use this with your sponsees. The man who was responsible for Abby Thatcher being released from the court system and not incarcerated for life in a mental institution for the terminally alcoholic. That man's name was Roland Hazard. Now, we've talked about Roland in the past, but I want to remind you the Roland H. story is critical here because it illustrates this point dramatically. Roland Hazard had every advantage. He was the scion of a very wealthy East Coast family. They had major businesses, and Roland was had the opportunity to be involved, and he was involved in these businesses. He was quite wealthy. The family was quite wealthy. But Roland was a drunk. And he had the money and the time and the prestige and the family that he was able to acquire the services of Dr. Jung. And Dr. Jung at that time was one of the three fathers of modern psychiatry, Jung, Adler, and Freud. Dr. Jung had his offices. He practiced psychiatry and medicine in Switzerland. Roland H. went to Switzerland and he spent a year with Dr. Jung. Dr. Jung pulled out all the stops. Roland was only there for one purpose, and that was to get well. By the time Dr. Jung finished with Roland, he knew everything there was to know about himself. There were no mysteries left. As far as the human solution went, he knew why he drank. He knew he was entitled to his feelings. He knew about stuffing feelings. He knew about dysfunctional families. He knew about abuse in his childhood. He knew all this stuff. He knew about the ups and downs of mood swings. I don't know what they call it today, but used to be manic depressive swings. All the stuff he knew. Not only that, but he knew what the ravages of alcohol meant to him. He knew that if he did not stop drinking and continue to stay sober, that this alcohol would kill him. He knew all that, and he had had enough experience as a drunk that he realized that when he drank, he could not control his drinking. And when he went on a bender, he got progressively worse, and that his physical condition was deteriorating as well as his mental condition. He knew all that. And Dr. Jung finished up with him and let him go, and he came back to the United States, and in 2 months he was drunk. So he went back over to Switzerland and he said, "Doctor, what happened?" Dr. Jung said to him, "I can't help you. You are of that class of hopeless, helpless, chronic alcoholics for which there is no human solution. And the only possible way that you're going to be saved from this disease is for you to have some sort of massive psychic displacement, perhaps some sort of massive spiritual experience, an epiphany of some kind, and I can't give it to you. So Roland came back to the United States. And fortunately for him and for us, because if this hadn't happened, we probably wouldn't be here. He got connected with the Oxford people, and he began to work their 6 steps. And very quickly, he began to grow spiritually, and he began to put God between him and the booze. He learned that he was powerless on his own to stop drinking, and the only hope he had was to have a loving God in his life, in his spirit, in his soul, that would stand between him and the alcohol. And through the steps of the Oxford, he was able to get that. And then when he stood up for Ebby, and Ebby became a member, and Ebby in 2 months had the same result. And then when Ebby went to talk to Bill Wilson, that's when this all began for us. But the story of Roland Hazard ought to illustrate to us, and we need to remember this story. It's in the book, by the way. It's disguised, but it's in there. Pardon?
You know around what page?
Yes, I do. I believe you'll find it on page 28. Oh, I was 2 pages off. I apologize sincerely and abjectly. Mea culpa. Page 26.
What is it, 26?
2:6. Let's read it so that Brian will not go away frustrated.
26.
A certain American businessman, read that, Roland H., had ability, good sense, and high character. For years he had floundered from one sanitarium to another. He had consulted the best-known American psychiatrist. Then he had gone to Europe, placed himself in the care of a celebrated physician, the psychiatrist Dr. Young, who prescribed for him. Though experience had made him skeptical, he finished his treatment with unusual confidence. His physical and mental condition were unusually good. Above all, he believed he had acquired such a, get this now, profound knowledge of the inner workings of his mind and its hidden springs that relapse was unthinkable. Nevertheless, he was drunk in a short time. More baffling still, he could give himself no satisfactory explanation. Now let's go over on page 27. Second full paragraph. The doctor said, "You have the mind of a chronic alcoholic. I have never seen one single case recover where that state of mind existed to the extent it does in you." Our friend felt as though the gates of hell had closed on him with a clang. "Is there no exception?" "Yes," replied the doctor, "there is. Exceptions to cases such as yours has been occurring since early times. Here and there, once in a while, alcoholics have had what are called vital spiritual experiences. To me, these occurrences are phenomena. They appear to be in the nature of huge emotional displacements and rearrangements. What's the promise say? Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Ideas, emotions, and attitudes which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men are suddenly cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them. In fact, I have been trying to produce some such emotional rearrangements within you. With many individuals, the methods which I employ are successful, but I have never been successful with an alcoholic of your description." Okay? Now then, the purpose of going through this part of the exercise here today was to illustrate that no human power is going to relieve us of our alcoholism. But what's the next pertinent idea? That God can and will if we seek Him. Could and would if He were sought. This is a direct promise, and believe me when I tell you this, it's true. Now then, let's consider this for a second. Okay, you say, your sponsee says to you, God can and will if I seek Him. But I've been going to church for 10 years. I've been baptized, I've been saved, I've been to retreats. I teach Sunday school, I sing in the choir, and I read the lesson every Sunday. And still I can't stay sober. What's going on here? Well, we say, maybe you're not seeking God in a way which has so far been effective for you. But we have the solution. It's simple. Work the steps. Because the 12 steps are the way we seek God. And here's the beautiful part about it. When we do that, it never fails. And it's simple. Why should that be so? Simply because these 12 steps are spiritual principles, restated as steps of action. The same spiritual principles you hear in every church, synagogue, and temple. But they're stated as things we ought to be, not as things we ought to do. We can be told to be good. We walk out of the church and we say, that's right, I need to be good. I need to be more spiritual. I need to have more of the milk of human kindness. I need to be merciful. I need to be loving. And an hour later we wake up to the fact that we don't know how to do that. Because all of these things are wonderful attributes, but they are not the actions that we must take. The actions that we must take are set forth in our 12 steps. And if you will look back through all of ecclesiastical and religious literature of any kind and description, whether you're a Hindu, Buddhist, Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, Muslim, doesn't matter. All the same spiritual principles will be found in all of the writings of all of these religions, but with one exception, and this is the exception which is cured, solved by the Big Book and by the 12 steps. All of these writings tell us how we are to be. They do not tell us how to get there. They may suggest to us that we will get there through faith, and perhaps some do. But I can tell you that there have been many attempts in the churches to establish 12-step programs without the 12 steps, recovery programs. Some called things like Alcoholics for Jesus. It was around for a long time, but nobody ever got past about the third year. And there was a lot of preaching and witnessing going on, but no sobriety. And this is not to lay any kind of a trip on the churches at all. It's just simply a fact. That's why I wrote the 12 Steps for Christians, because the people I was working with in the church recognized that there had to be a practical program of action which would bring us in line with the provisions right here. That God can and will if we seek Him. And we go about seeking God by doing those things which are going to free us from the things which block us from God. That will be our insanities, our defects of character, and our guilts. And the way the 12 steps are set up, it becomes very simple. It is a straightforward, not metaphysical in any sense, just straightforward, mechanical thing that we do. First, we find out what's wrong with us. Then we admit what's wrong with us. And then we take it to God and say, God, these are the things that are wrong with me, and I can't fix these myself, and I need your help. And the people we've harmed, we go out and set matters straight. And when we've done all that, we enter the world of the Spirit, we are cleansed and released from those things which block us from God, and we become God conscious, and then we get to go on from there for the rest of our lives, continuing to improve our conscious contact with God and carry His message out to other alcoholics and others in the world. And when we do that, we not only stay sober, but we have a life beyond anything we could ever imagine for ourselves. Literally it's so, and we're going to read this in maybe today, maybe next week. In this third step, we're going to find the whole program of Alcoholics Anonymous encapsulated in one sentence. That God, being all-powerful, will give us what we need, everything we need, if we do two things: stay close to Him and perform His work well. Stay close to Him, perform His work well. You'll find it on page 63 in the first paragraph at the top of the page. Page 63, first full paragraph, top of the page. Think about it for a second. That's the whole program. First I have to get close to God, and I do that through the first 9 steps. Then I must stay close to Him, and I do that through prayer, meditation, and service, and inventory. And then I must perform His work well, and I carry the message.
What paragraph is that?
Top paragraph on page 63. Okay, now then, God can and will if He is sought. The next 2 words on your page, on page 60, let's look at those 2 words. These are of great significance, and we're going to spend some time now considering what those 2 words mean. Find the 3 pertinent ideas. Just underneath the 3 pertinent ideas on page 60, you will find 2 words. The first 2 words of the sentence: being convinced. Everybody find that?
Yes.
Being convinced of what? When Bill originally wrote this, you remember in the original manuscript he wrote, if you've gotten to this point and you're not convinced, reread this book to this point, and if you're still not convinced, throw this book away. And the editorial board said, no, Bill, we're not going to go that far. So they changed it to 2 words, being convinced. Now then, let's see what we need to be convinced of. Well, it makes it pretty obvious. We've got this much of the book that we've already covered, right? In an essence, then, we need to be convinced of everything that we have found in this book up to this point. Is it epitomized somewhere to make it easier for us to teach? Well, of course it is. Let's go right back to page 58. We're going to find everything we need to be convinced of in the 3 pages leading up to those 2 words. Being convinced of what? It's all right here. Now, this makes it easy. And now we begin to see the total significance of listening when chapter 5 is being read at the meetings, following along in our books. And by the way, you're going to be called upon to teach your sponsees to meditate. Make sure they understand that meditation is primarily listening. They can start learning how to listen right from the beginning, as chapter 5, chapter 3, and the promises are being read. Listen. Pay attention. We need to set the example for that. Okay, let's look at the first thing that they need to be convinced of. That rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. Dr. Bob says never. Bill Wilson is supposed to have said, this is probably apocryphal, but maybe not, that he would change only 1 word in the big book. He would change rarely to never. I suspect that he definitely felt that way. I don't know whether he ever stated it. There's another way to read that sentence, by the way, which is highly instructive. Rarely have we seen a person who has thoroughly followed our path. And it's our job to change that around. That's why we do these sponsorship workshops. Because the biggest problem in AA today is a lack of good sponsorship. And I honor you folks for being here on a Saturday afternoon, week after week after week. I love the dedication that you're putting into this. Because it is you who are the hope of recovery for hundreds of people. It is you and the message you carry, which is the hope of recovery for hundreds of sore and sick, suffering alcoholics who would otherwise die. It's an awesome responsibility. A man I sponsored was talking to me the other day. We've been working together about 7 years. He said, I'm riding into my great-great-grand sponsees now. This is wonderful. And I said, Danny, I told you this is what's going to happen. You aren't going to be able to go anywhere in this world 20 years from now without running into somebody who knows who the heck you are, because you're in their chain. You're in their recovery family. Now then, those who do not recover. This is pretty significant, isn't it? We're going to identify now those who do not recover, those who fail, are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. The word completely has great significance, doesn't it? It doesn't say, oh golly gee whiz, it'd be kind of nice if you sort of gave up every once in a while to some of what we do around here. That's the message so many people carry in the rooms these days. Oh, don't worry about that. If you're new, you don't have to work the steps. Just don't drink. No matter what happens, if your butt falls off, put it in a little red wagon and drag it to a meeting.
Yeah.
The only thing that's important for you now to know is you just don't drink no matter what happens. For God's sakes, read the big book. When did Bill work his steps? He was still in the hospital. So there's so much of this stuff. Will not completely give themselves to this simple program. I want you to be aware of this as we go through, getting all the way back up to the three pertinent ideas. These three pages are absolutely full of what the philosophers call categorical imperatives. Absolutes. Must. Some idiots around here try to tell us there are no musts in the big book. There are no musts in the program. I think the count is 67 just for the word must alone. You know what must means in this book? It means or else. So we're looking here all the way through these pages at absolutes. Nothing here is stated in weasel words. There's no equivocation. There is none of the comparative stuff that we hear so much about. We're not comparing one thing or another here. This is all straightforward. And all of these things are stated as absolutes because that is precisely what they are. Going on with that same sentence. The people who cannot give themselves this simple program, usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. Now, does that give us a clue as to what honesty really means in working the 12 steps? It really means self-honesty, doesn't it? You see, lack of self-honesty, self-dishonesty is one of the major symptoms of being buried in self. The selfish, self-centered person is self-deluded. And if we're not freed from that self-delusion, we don't recover. Cash register honesty and being honest with others, yes, that's important. Not necessarily because it has a spiritual significance on its own, but because when we're being dishonest, we put ourselves under additional strain and pressure and we feel guilty. And it is the guilt which is blocking us from God, not the dishonesty. But if we're not able or willing to be honest with ourselves, we'll never find out what's wrong with us. Notice what we're doing here. We're going to have to first find out what's wrong. Then we admit what we found. Then we take that to God. Third, the fourth step, fifth step, and seventh step. And it's all laid out for us, and this is all mechanical. If we just do it this, boom, boom, and boom, God removes from us those defects of character which stand in the way of us and our Creator. And we also learn whom we have harmed, and we become willing to make amends to them, and we go out in the ninth step and do it, and that sets us free from our guilt. And then we enter the world of the Spirit, and it all happens automatically. And the Big Book tells us, uses that precise word on page 85. This has happened automatically. You want to know what the promises are? The promises are the inevitable result of working the steps. You're going to get those promises whether you want them or not. As long as you're willing to do the work. Why you would not want them, I can't imagine. And that's kind of a cutesy way of saying that they're automatic. They're going to come. Just as it is equally automatic that if we do not do this work, we will drink again, and for us to drink is to die. That's automatic as well. Just how important is this question of honesty? First full paragraph on page 58, the last sentence, the last 3 lines. There are those too who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders, and we're seeing a lot of that these days. It's always been around, but now everybody's coming in here with much more specific diagnoses and carting their little pill cases around with them. I didn't say pillowcases, I said pill cases. They're a cocktail of all these various marvelous and wonderful inventions of the pharmaceutical industry. There are those who have grave emotional and mental disorders, but many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. Does that tell us how critically important honesty is? And by the way, honesty is not the principle behind the first step. That's total nonsense. There are no principles behind the steps. Steps are the principles. Honesty is something which is a gift from God. Dishonesty is a major character defect. We don't get rid of our dishonesty ourselves. We have to have God's help with it. Dishonesty is always the product of fear. We are not dishonest unless we are afraid of the consequences of being honest. Honesty has absolutely nothing to do with the first step in the sense of it being any kind of a principle. But it is an essential that we develop the capacity to be honest. And we're going to develop that by working the steps. Let's make sure we understand. Please go to page 75. I beg your pardon, 73. On page 73, we are now looking at the fifth step. The first partial paragraph at the top of the page describes for us in the last sentence what happens when we work the fifth step. They have not learned enough of humility, fearlessness, and honesty, in the sense we find it necessary until they told someone else all their life story. Therefore, we see that honesty is a great gift through the grace of God comes to us when we do our fifth step. Going back to page 58 now, please. The second paragraph. The third line. If you have decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you are ready to take certain steps. Parse the sentence and see what it's really saying. First, if. If what? If you have decided. It is another decision which must be made. It ought to be part and parcel of the decision of the third step. Why? Because when we say the third step prayer, we are not only asking God for help, but we are committing ourselves to go forward with the rest of the steps. We're saying, God, if you'll do these things for me, I'll do my part. If you have decided you want what we have, now part of our main, maybe the most important part of our work in working with sponsees, especially in the initial stages of our work with them when they're new, is to demonstrate to them the power of God and God's way of life working in and through us, to demonstrate God's love working in and through us so that they will want what we have. The third step prayer, remember, is going to ask God to do this for us, to allow us to be this kind of an example. And so when we read this, we see that our new person needs to want what we have. We're going to demonstrate to them what we have, because it is not enough to talk about it. You're going to know a person by their actions, not by their words. If you've decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, that certainly does not say to search and search among all the possible potential sponsors out there until you find one who'll go easy on you. Or you'll find someone who says, don't worry about the steps, my dear. I'll tell you when you're ready to work the steps, and then we will work probably one each year. Because just remember, you don't have to get well by Thursday. If you're willing to go to any length to get it. Now, again, we're going to hear this in several different places as we go through the rest of the book. But remember that we have agreed to go to any lengths for victory over alcohol. What's the next word? Then. That means now. Right now. Right then. At that point, when you have made this decision, right then, you are ready to take certain steps. Not when your lazy sponsor gets around to it a year from now. Right then. Let's go to page 96, please. I want to show you every step of the way here just how consistent this big book is. Page 96. You have been working with a new person. You have given them the big book, and you have asked them to read the book. The whole book. And they've done so. Suppose you're making your second visit to a man. He's read this volume and says he is prepared to go through with the 12 steps of the program of recovery. That's just what we got through reading. You want what we have, willing to go to any lengths to get it, ready to take certain steps. Having had the experience yourself, you give much practical advice. Let them know you're available. If he wishes to make a decision, tell the story. In other words, the big book backs up the precise meaning of this sentence as soon as we get into the instructions for working with a new person. At the second meeting, we take them immediately to the steps if they indicate that they have decided they want what we have and are willing to go to any lengths to get it. Got it?
Got it.
Okay. Next paragraph, page 58. 58. But some of these we balk. Some of these, the word these there means the steps. But some of these steps we balked. We thought we could find an easier, softer way. You find that all the way through the rooms these days. And people snap up the easier, softer way just as soon as it's offered. And there's plenty of offering going on. You don't have to write down your inventory. All you got to do is fill in the blanks on Joe and Charlie's form. You don't have to write a narrative which disgorges all this stuff from your head onto paper. We've done all your thinking for you. Just put check marks. You don't have to separate your wrongs from the wrongs that others have done you. You put them all together in one mix-max. Because then you can say, well, I see what she did to me, but no wonder she did that to me because look what I did to her. Therefore, I shouldn't hate her anymore. Therefore, the conclusion is, I don't hate her anymore. Balderdash. Big Book does not indulge itself ever in comparative fault. That's not the way it's written. We take each of these things and consider them separately because they must be in order for us to find out what's wrong with us. We thought we could find an easier, softer way, but we could not. Am I convinced when I get over here to page 60? Being convinced that I could not find an easier, softer way. With all earnestness at our command, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. Am I convinced that I need to do that? Some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go absolutely. Now, there are two absolutes there. The word absolutely, of course, means exactly what it says. The word nil means zero, zilch, nada, nothing. We're not going to get anything until we have let go, absolutely. Well, now what is the third step all about? Certainly it is evidence of our decision to let go absolutely. And it is these are the first steps in the direction of letting go. We're not going to hold on to our old ideas. Why old ideas? What's the significance of that? Did you ever stop to think what all these words mean? When we teach our sponsees, we need to teach them what's going on here. Hold on to my old ideas. What's the significance? We learned this when we were looking at the second step, didn't we? The lack of power, this was our dilemma. What does that mean? It means not that we are powerless over our actions, we're powerless over our thinking, our old ideas. Everything I knew when I got here was wrong. I'd start over again. Through the power of the steps and the power of God and the help of my sponsors, I had to build a whole new way of thinking. The big book will tell us in a couple more pages that we're reborn. It's a rebirth of thinking. For some of us who may have certain religious beliefs, that may have a totally different significance. But here in the big book, it means what that we have let go of all our old ideas, and that we have, through God's grace, we have achieved all brand new ideas. A new way of living, a new way of looking at things, a new way of looking at ourselves and our place in the universe. And unless we do that, the results will be nil until we let go of all that old stuff, absolutely. And one of the biggest problems you're going to find with the sponsees, they want to hang on for dear life to some of that stuff because it has been so ingrained and pounded and beaten into them that they believe that they cannot survive without pandering and catering to all that old stuff. And we have to show them and teach them how to let go. They may not want to do it, but it's a strange thing on the way to sobriety that when we work the steps, we do in fact achieve a release from the old ideas. What's the promise again? Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. We will be reborn. And this happens automatically, and it will happen if they will do the work. Everybody got that now? Please, if any of this doesn't make sense or it's not clear, we'll keep working on it until we get it cleared up. It tells us then, being convinced means being convinced that this is so, that I'm going to have to be willing to let go of all my old ideas, and I'm going to have to let go absolutely, or I will not receive the results that are promised. Going on then, remember we deal with alcohol, cunning, baffling, powerful, and without help it's too much for us. Am I convinced that that's so? Have I in fact taken the first step? Am I absolutely convinced in my innermost selves that as an alcoholic I am powerless over alcohol, that it is too much for me, that I cannot even contemplate the prospect of handling it on my own anymore, because it's proven beyond any shadow of a doubt that I'm powerless. I can't stop drinking on my own. I can't not drink. Cunning, baffling, powerful, anthropomorphizing an inanimate object, and I thought that when I first read this phrase. But so what? It is only a liquid. Can it be cunning, baffling, powerful? No, not in and of itself. We deal with alcohol, and what this means is it is an analogy, or maybe a syllogism. We're going from the substance alcohol to what it does to us and why we permit it to continue to do those things to us. In other words, the problem is in our heads. That's where the cunning, baffling, and powerful resides, not in the bottle. Later, we will learn that the bottle is only a symbol, that alcohol is but a symptom. The problem lies in our heads. And it lies principally in the fact that we have been self-directed all of our lives, or tried to be. We've been playing God. Am I convinced that this is true? Now here's our second step. There is one who has all power, that one is God. Am I convinced that that is so? You see what's happened here? Those two sentences show that we are convinced of the first step and the second step. That alcohol is too much for us, and there's one who has all power, that one is God. If I can say now that I'm convinced that those things are so, then of course I can say I have worked my first and second steps, and I'm now ready to move on. Everybody got that? You see how logical and how simple this all is? But we have to read it carefully and understand what it's saying to us. Every word, every phrase, every sentence in the big book is important. I don't care what chapter you find it in. You go to the 10th chapter to employers. If you left $1,000 bill in there 3 years ago, it'll still be there because you haven't opened up the book since then. If you want to hide something, put it in chapter 8 or chapter 10. Unless you happen to be a serious student of the big book, in which case you'll be referring to those chapters often, because they contain many absolute jewels of recovery wisdom. May you find him now. Am I convinced that this is my primary purpose on this earth right now, is seeking God? Remember, third pertinent idea, God can and will if I seek him. Am I now convinced that that's my primary purpose from here on out, to seek God? Next sentence, another categorical imperative. Half measures availed us nothing. Explain to your sponsee, you cannot get half recovery. There is no such a thing. You get nothing from half measures. Don't listen to the half measures gurus. They're all over the place. What are full measures? Simple, they're in here. The directions, they're all in here. These are the full measures. The half measures are just floating around out there. Most of them figments of somebody's fertile imagination. Half measures availed us nothing. Am I convinced that that is so? We stood at the turning point. Am I convinced that this is where I stand, at the turning point? At this juncture, I have to make a decision, and I have a choice. Go to page 25. We'll see what that choice is. 2.5, page 25. I stand at the turning point. The last partial paragraph, about 8 lines up from the bottom of page 25. We were in a position where life was becoming impossible. And if we had passed into the region from which there is no return through human aid, we had but 2 alternatives. This is the only choice we have in here. One was to go on to the bitter end, blotting out the consciousness of our intolerable situation as best we could, and the other to accept spiritual help. This we did because we honestly wanted to and were willing to make the effort. That's the choice. Back on page 59, we stood at the turning point. What decision are we going to make? The next sentence tells us, page 59. We therefore, put the word therefore in there and just fill it in your mind. We therefore ask his protection and care with complete abandon. Am I convinced that I must do that? What is asking his protection and care with complete abandon? It is the third step. You see how these few sentences have led us, first step, second step, and now to the third step. Am I convinced that I must ask God's protection and care with complete abandon? And then here are the steps we took, which are suggested as a program of recovery. Just exactly the same suggestion you will receive from the jump master as you're about to exit the airplane to make your first parachute. The suggestion will be, pull the ripcord. You don't have to. But we highly suggest it. Am I convinced that these 12 steps have worked for millions of others, that they are working for my sponsor, for the people who have become my support group, for the people in my home group? Am I convinced that these steps have worked for them? Am I convinced that these steps will work for me? Am I convinced? See, there's a whole lot to these 2 little words, isn't there? Being convinced. And you see how wonderful it is, what a great opportunity you have when you get to this point with your sponsee, to be able to teach them right from what they've been hearing at every meeting exactly what all these things mean. Because now it gets into context of you. Are you convinced? It brings it right home. It's no longer an academic exercise. It's no longer something that we just gloss over and we let wash over us while we're waiting for the real meeting to start. This is the real meeting. Much of the time in many meetings, the best part and the strongest part and the only part of the meeting that has anything to do at all with recovery will be reading chapter 5. That's the truth of it. We are not, nor I hope, pray to God, we will ever be Problems Anonymous. And I hope we never do, and I pray that we never do, identify our chair people as facilitators. You know, that's the modern term now for somebody who leads a group, encounter group, a facilitator. They used to be, leaders or something. Now they're, I don't know what they're facilitating. Anyway, I'm not nearly as jaundiced about our good friends in the healing professions as I sound. My emphasis here is to let us all consider what our job is, because much of what our new people have learned who have been in the clutches, that's not nice, who have been subjected to, no, that's not right here, who have been treated by the very best minds in the psychological, psychiatric, and counseling professions, and these people are dedicated professionals. Many of them are. But unfortunately, much of what your new sponsee has learned is not only utterly useless, but is counter to what they must learn from you. So it's important for us to understand what we're dealing with. Particularly will you find that they have been given massive excuses for their crapped out behavior, which they have loved to receive. Freedom from any self-doubt, freedom from any kind of guilt, because after all, they are responsible, not me. Also, it's important for us to remember that Alcoholics Anonymous program of action is not a feel-good program. It's got nothing to do with feel-good. It has to do with surrender to a higher power and recovery from a deadly disease. It's got nothing to do with feel-good. And every time we concentrate on feel-good, we get clear off base. If my concern with you as my sponsee is that you not ever feel bad, I'm never going to show you how to grow. How many people make the mistake in the fifth step as sponsors, spending half the time in the fifth step expatiating on their own sins and how rotten they were, trying to make their sponsee feel better? How many times do we make the mistake of telling people that their fourth and fifth step must include a large amount of statements about how wonderful they have been, what good things they have done? What does the fifth step in the big book say? One sentence is the whole fifth step. Anybody remember what that sentence is? We pocket our pride and go to it, illuminating every twist of character, every dark cranny of the past. Why? Because it's the bad stuff that's killing us, not the good stuff. It's the bad stuff that has to be flushed out of our systems. It's the bad stuff we have to admit so that we can go to God in our seventh step and ask Him to take it away. When you think about it that way, it makes sense, doesn't it? It makes sense that we ought to shy clear away from any effort to make our sponsees feel good. That's not our job. That's God's job. And there isn't any question about it. They're going to feel great. But we didn't give them feel great. God did. Remember, we're leaving the results up to Him. We carry the message, and we let God have the results. He knows a hell of a lot better how to do that than we do. Many of us exclaimed, "What an order! I can't go through with it." Now, Bill. I'll bet you never heard anybody say that. And I've been around here 38 years, and I've never heard anybody say that, except reading chapter 5. Did anybody ever come up to you and say, "Wow, what an order. I can't go through with it"? If that ever happened, you'd have to say, "My God, Eureka, Bill was right after all." Oh, well. What? An order?
Yeah.
What an order. Do not be discouraged. No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. Am I convinced that that is so? We are not saints. This is kind of it looks like a falling back from the positive statements made before, but it's not. It is reflective of something which most people just aren't aware of this, but it's kind of interesting when you follow through this whole syllogism. You remember that in the 12 and 12, we have the St. Francis prayer, which Bill put in there as an example of what some of them used for meditation. It has now been twisted, turned, perverted, and made into the 11-step prayer as if it were AA orthodoxy. It is not, nor could it ever be, because it is a sectarian prayer and it speaks of an afterlife, neither one of which is acceptable under our traditions. We are not a religion, and we in no way can promote religion. Certainly we are not sectarian. Certainly this is not a religion. However, think about that prayer, and then think about where these guys came from who wrote this book. They were under the influence of the Oxfordians, who believed that if you worked their 12 steps, you would become perfect. And they found out that wasn't true for them. They also found out that they darn sure weren't saints. And so they had to put this disclaimer in here. Nothing like perfect adherence to these principles. By the way, this reminds me of another of the pet sayings around here, which is absolutely false. That the only step we have to work perfectly is the first step. Utterly false. We're talking about the third step right now. We have a prayer and we have a decision. Does the third step mean that we can partly decide to quit playing God? Does it mean that we only decide to let God be our director in certain matters and not others? That we are not going to permit God to be the father and we be the child? He can only be the stepfather. Well, what nonsense! And when we use the third step prayer, does it mean that we only have to half mean it? We don't have to, and the words are in the book. It means we don't have to read it perfectly. What nonsense! What about the second step? Second step is a belief, isn't it? Came to believe. Does it mean that we only have to partly believe? Or that we only have to believe that God is, we don't have to believe that He can restore us to sanity? Or that we don't have to believe He is, but we have to believe He can restore us to sanity? Try to take that and twist it around and see that it is utterly ridiculous. Take a look at the sixth step. We're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. You see any wiggle room in there? Anything that can be less than perfect? How about the 7th step? It's a prayer. Are we going to ask God to take away only part of our defects? And only do that part-time? Take a look at the 8th step. We became willing to make amends to them all. We had a list of all the people we've harmed. Are we going to only do that part way? We can throw away some of them? You see, we have to be so careful of these things and think them through. When you hear these aphorisms which are scattered around through the rooms, think them through. Compare them with the big book. Compare them with the steps before you repeat them, and try, because you're going to get your sponsee totally confused. You tell them on the one hand everything in here is categorical, all these things are imperative, all these things are absolutes, but not really. The point is that we're willing to grow along spiritual lines. The principles we've set down are guides to progress. The principles we've set down means the 12 steps. If you have any doubt that the steps are the principles are the steps, just read that sentence. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. The Oxfordians claim perfection. Our guys found out it wasn't true for them. They therefore disclaimed spiritual perfection because they found out that that was the road to destruction. The moment that we begin to think that we're spiritually perfect, we can quit working, can't we? We've already reached perfection. We found out, as the big book tells us, that this must continue for a lifetime. Yes, Brian?
Yeah, I was at the archives meeting a week or 2 weeks ago, and there was a picture of Eddie and Bill W. Side by side, and Eddie actually looked pretty good, he was healthy. But did he, and he was at a convention center, I think in the early 70s, Eddie never became successful with the 6 steps of the Oxfordians.
You never what?
He never became successful with the 6 steps of the Oxfordians. Not many people did, but did he ever, if he would still hang out with Bill W., around all those spiritual people at a convention, did he ever grasp the program? Did he ever have, time of sobriety besides the 6 months he had with the Oxfordians?
Oh, certainly. But when was this picture taken?
I'm just guessing. They're both very old. They both look very healthy. And I think it was like, I don't know when Bill W. died, but I think it was like 71, 72, 73 in that area.
Yeah.
Convention.
The convention was 1970.
70. Okay.
Huh? Miami, yeah. And Bill died in the Miami Heart Institute next January. Just a couple months later.
So at that time, was Ebby grasping the 12 steps? Was he sober?
Ebby was in and out a lot. I don't know too much about his history. I think there's a book out about him, but I haven't read it. Have you seen that Ebby book? I haven't either. I've been told it is. But what's the point?
I was just curious.
Oh, okay. I was just curious what the point was. But
You brought up
The point
Ebby's
is
name.
they're willing to grow on spiritual lines.
Okay. Finally, our description of the alcoholic, chapter agnostic, personal adventure, poor and apt, clear with pre-printed ideas, and we already went over that. And the next sentence is being convinced, and now we know what we have to be convinced of, right? Anybody got any questions about it? And if anything occurs to you during this week, please write them down. We'll be glad to try to clear them up. Next week we will get into the 3rd step itself, and that you will find if you read ahead from page 60 through 63. There's a ton of stuff in there. You may want to familiarize yourself with those pages in the meantime. And any announcements for the good of AA?
It's good.
Be good, did you say?
It's good.
Oh, AA is good, all right. Any commercial announcements like dances or whoopee parties or anything like that?
This is gratitude dinner at Bottom Line, Saturday the 30th.
No.
Excuse me. And there's you don't have to show up, that's okay. And there's an alcohol Wednesday from 12 to Thursday at 12.
Yeah, okay. And by the way, if any of you have been coming to our Thursday night Big Book study at the bottom line, we won't be doing it this next Thursday. That'll be in the middle of their alcathon over there. So that'll be continued the following Thursday. Yes, Brian.
And if anybody doesn't know, there's Thanksgiving dinner here for many family members, and it's all you can eat, and it's free. So if anybody's here,
Free, did you say free? Oh, the magic word. And our group is preparing through the good offices and the super deluxe oven of Linda. We're preparing a turkey, I assume.
Wow.
Or did you forget?
No, I
You didn't forget, okay.
I was just.
All right. We wouldn't want to be embarrassed if you didn't show up on the turkey.
Silence of the yams.
All right, let's close the meeting.
Big things down to the end.
Might not.
Let this circle represent the unity of our fellowship. Have a moment of silence for those who are still suffering. And then we'll say the Lord's Prayer together. In the stairway group, we don't say anything after we say amen. Thank you. Lord's Prayer. Our Father,
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
okay, help Marilyn get this place cleaned up, will you?
We said that.
None of my damn business. I just hear it. Oh, okay, good. As long as you're doing that, it's all right.
I'm doing my best. Thank you, Paul. It was my best effort.
Sergeant Major, do me a favor.
Yes, sir. Anything you want.
Will you get the wandering ones outside and tell them to come in? We're ready to go.
Sorry to be late.
So far, so good, Jim.
Huh?
So far, so good. You're doing a good job.
Thank you.
That 10 minutes went, 10 minutes went really fast.
What?
The 10 minutes out there went real fast.
Oh, yeah.
So beautiful out today. Like
It is
paradise.
gorgeous, isn't it? You look so sad. You need to talk? What? Sure. It's up to you, honey, what you want to do. Sorry about that, kid. All right, guys, let's get going. I want to attention now. Pay attention, please. I want to remind you that the Stairway Group meets again at 7:30 this evening. We're studying the Big Book together. You're all cordially invited to join us. And at 9:15 we have a third meeting every Saturday. And in that we are working with the language of the heart. And it's a really nice little meeting. Now we're going back to page 58, please.